Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to the stage, John Gaynor.
Well, it's been a very busy morning, and we only have one special event to wrap up our first morning of the convention. Yeah, I started off this morning and I was talking about Dairy Queen being an iconic brand, a 72-year-old brand. But you know, there's another relationship that we all should be very proud of, and that is 28 years ago, the Dairy Queen system began to partner with Children's Miracle Network hospitals. And during that 28-year time period, Dairy Queen operators have raised $91 million. Give yourselves a hand. You know, it's interesting, $91 million sounds like so much money, but when it comes to health care, we all know that each and every year with costs increasing, to treat children in the hospitals, it just requires even more fundraising from partners like Dairy Queen. Last year, the Dairy Queen system raised over $5 million for Children's Miracle Network. Thank you. What a wonderful effort from all of you. I think a lot of you that have gotten to know me over the last 8 to 9 years, you know that I really believe, truly, that when you're in business, you need to give back. And we all have a responsibility as business people and just individuals in our community to help other people that might have needs. And it was several years ago, I was out in Victoria Island for a Dairy Queen operators meeting. And most of you know I don't play golf, but I love to go to the events and meet the operators. And I had the opportunity to meet a gentleman who I had never met before. And we started off talking about the Dairy Queen business and his stores, and he was remodeling and his grill and chill. And then he started telling me a little bit about his family. And from the moment that I met Tony, I said, this is a very special individual in the Dairy Queen system. But what I didn't know back then was the journey that Tony and his family were really on. So I invited Tony to join us at our convention. And Tony, would you come up on stage and join me this morning? When I met Tony, he started telling me about Lindsay's journey, and most importantly, he said to me, he said, you know, if there's ever an opportunity that I could talk to Dairy Queen operators, or Lindsay could talk to Dairy Queen operators about how important Children's Miracle Network hospitals are to our system and to helping kids, he said, I would love to do it. And I said, okay, Tony. And I remembered, and I kept a little note on my desk back in Minneapolis. And when we were planning this convention, one of the first people that I thought of was Tony. And I said, you know, Tony, I really think operators would love to hear you talk a little bit about what CMNH means and how close it is to the Dairy Queen family.
Absolutely, John. And I'm definitely humbled for the opportunity to come and talk to everybody here and talk to the whole Dairy Queen family. One of the things that we didn't talk about in the video was my experience with the hospital. I'd always been a passionate supporter of CMN and the Children's Hospital, but I'd never had an opportunity to actually visit the hospital and see the work, that the money that's raised by CMN, how it's used. So prior to going to Portugal, we had a local meeting, and we were invited all to the hospital to actually see the work, see the hospital, and there was about 30 operators at this meeting, and we got divided into 3 different groups, and one group, I remember, went through the ER department, but my group got to go through the oncology department. And I remember walking through this oncology day clinic, and when I first got in there, and I'm watching, and I'm seeing all these children having chemo, blood on transfusions and that. I was totally, I didn't know what to say. Here, all these children were having life-saving therapy, but yet they were all smiling and happy and enjoying themselves with games and their parents. Then we went up to the ward, and it was an unbelievably emotional experience. And I remember coming home that night and giving my wife a hug and saying, how thankful we should be that we have two wonderful, healthy daughters. And then about a month later, that's when we went to Portugal. And when I got the news that Lindsay had leukemia, the doctors weren't very hopeful. She had already had 3 weeks of a deteriorating condition, and when the doctor first told me that Lindsay had leukemia, he said, we're going to try to do everything we can to save her, but just be prepared. She now has a fever, a very high fever. She no longer has an immune system, and she could potentially lapse into a coma, and nothing we could do. We need to start chemotherapy right away here. She's going to need to go through the first 6 weeks. She cannot leave, she cannot fly. And I thought back to my trip about a month earlier to the hospital there, and after composing myself, I had the opportunity to call the hospital, and I talked to a doctor there, and for hours he explained to me what leukemia was, what blood cells were, what all these things were, something that you'd never think in your life you'd ever have to know. And with his help and with his support, I was able to convince the doctors in Portugal to let me try to get Lindsay home on an air ambulance and save her life. And I know that if I hadn't had that opportunity, I never would have thought about that. So I think that if I hadn't been part of the DQ family and had the opportunity to go to Children's Hospital, I don't know that my daughter would really be here today. So for that, I can't even, I'm so thankful.
Well, I'm going to get you to tell the second part of your story, because after I learned of the journey that you guys were on, you talked to me about your passion to try to raise money and give back for the people that had helped your daughter.
Yeah, when we're at the hospital there, and we have long days, long stays, and then when Lindsay relapsed, in 2010, we spent 9 months of that in the hospital. My wife and I took turns living in the isolation room for a month at a time, just so that Lindsay would not be alone ever, but also that we were also protected, that we weren't bringing things in. And in doing that, we saw amazing experiences, some not so good, some that will change our lives forever. But a couple of the amazing experiences were, I'd bring Dairy Queen in all the time, and there were kids there that hadn't eaten for 4, 6 months at a time, if you can imagine that. And you come in with the dilly bar, and their eyes light up, and they ate it, and I remember this one girl who she was in the transplant room next to Lindsay, and her parents had tried to make her eat for months. And I said to her one day, let me take her to Dairy Queen and see if she would enjoy, maybe just having a little bit of ice cream or something. And her parent told her that, and she was allowed to go out on a day pass, and I took her to my store, which was only a couple minutes away. And for the first time in about 5 months, she actually ate an ice cream cone. And it was the most unbelievable, amazing experience of my life. And it's, when you go into the hospital and you see all these kids and you're able to give them a little bit of happiness or put a smile on their face, it's the most amazing experience you'll ever feel. So, from the amazing work that CMN does in giving these children the ability, the researchers money to find one day hopefully cures, from the, buying small things like games to pass your days, it's amazing. So when we support CMN, we're supporting all our kids. And I know that everybody here has either known somebody or has had their child or knows somebody who's had the child at Children's Hospital. So this touches all of us. And if we can just do our small part in helping all our hospitals take care of our kids, it's the least we can do. I mean, our children are our legacies, and if we can do a small part, that's all I ask of everybody.